Hello everyone, I hope you're doing good and staying safe. Welcome to SimpliCode's YouTube channel, and in today's session, we will be discussing about triggers in SQL. So in this tutorial, we'll be going through various concepts of triggers, understand its significance and see how it exactly works in SQL. Now, have you ever watched a line of dominoes fall when you knock the first one down? Now, in that case, you have just invoked a trigger which has created an event there. Your touch of first tile triggered the chain reaction that has knocked down the rest of the dominoes as well. Now, this is the same principle applied to database triggers as well. Now, a trigger in database terms is a set of instructions that is activated, or we say it as fired by some specific event, normally a command issued through a SQL code. More on that soon, but before we get started, if you're new to the channel and haven't subscribed already, consider getting subscribed to our channel SimpliCode to stay updated with all the latest technologies, and hit that bell icon to never miss an update from us. So without any further ado, let's get started with today's topic. Firstly, let us discuss the agenda for today's session. We'll start the tutorial by understanding what are triggers in SQL, and then we'll go through why we use triggers, and after that we'll see different types of triggers used in SQL, and after that we'll be discussing various operations used with triggers, and then we'll get into the execution part in MySQL workbench using various examples. And finally, we'll wrap the session by discussing some advantages and disadvantages of triggers. So without any further ado, let us jump straight into today's topic. So firstly, what are triggers in SQL? Now, triggers is a database object which fires when an event occurs in a database, or you can say a trigger is a piece of code executed automatically in response to a specific event occurred on a table in the database. Now, triggers, as the name suggests, are stored procedures. Now, what are stored procedures? Means procedures are basically functions which contain SQL statements which are stored in database and can return some output which are executed or fired when some event occurs. Now, a trigger is always associated with a particular table, and if the table is deleted, all the associated triggers are also deleted automatically. Now, the triggers are executed in response to certain events like insert, update, or delete in a particular table. Now, a trigger is invoked either before or after the following events from the DML commands, like through insert when a new row is inserted, or through an update command when an existing row is updated, or through a delete command when a row is deleted. So when you issue an insert, update, or delete statement, the relational database management system fires the corresponding trigger. And also, these triggers helps in maintaining the integrity of the data by changing the data of the database. Let us now understand the syntax of triggers. Now, we can create triggers for various types of operations as discussed above, and we'll mostly focus on DML triggers as these are the most commonly and extensively used triggers, and also at the same time most important. So a DML trigger can be created using the following syntax, which is followed as create trigger, trigger name, before, after, instead of, insert or update or delete on table name for each row, begin, trigger body, end, double slash. So let's just discuss the different parts of the syntax clearly. Now we have the create or replace trigger, trigger name in the first line, where we give the name of the trigger we are creating or updating. Here, trigger name is to be replaced by the name you want to have for your trigger in your database. Now it can be of any name as per your choice. Next, we have the before, after instead of keywords. Here we define when the trigger would run, that is before or after the DML operation. For example, if we want a trigger to be executed after insertion to a table, we will consider after insert here. Next, we have various DML commands like insert or update or delete. This is the operation or event we have to define which will trigger a procedure to be executed. If we want a procedure to run after a deletion happens on the table, then we'll consider writing delete there. Next, we have on table name. Here we have to specify the name of the table on which we are attaching the trigger. And next we have for each row keyword, where this line specifies that the procedure will be executed for each one of the rows present. Here we can set a condition for which rows to be impacted. This part is optional though. In case we don't use this, a trigger shall convert to a statement level trigger rather than being a row level one. So we'll discuss about that later. So next we have the when condition, which mentions some condition basis of which the trigger will run. In absence of when condition, which is again optional, you can expect it to run for all the eligible rows. So this is very important as this will control which rows the trigger must run. And finally, we have the trigger body, which is the main logic of what to perform once the trigger is fired. In the previous statements, all we defined is when this trigger will be fired, but here we have to define what to do after the trigger is fired. So this is the main execution part of the SQL code. And we end the syntax with end double slash. Right, moving ahead, why we use SQL triggers. Now, since a trigger resides in the database and anyone who has the required privilege can use it, a trigger lets you to write a set of SQL statements that multiple applications can use. So it allows the user to avoid redundant code when multiple programs need to perform the same database operations. SQL triggers also maintains complex column constraints. Now what I mean from that is it helps in maintaining the integrity constraints in the database tables, especially when the primary key and foreign key constraints are not defined. And it also helps in maintaining the track of all the changes like updation, deletion and insertion that occur in the database table. Triggers also increase the performance of SQL queries because it does not need to compile each time the query is executed. Alright, moving ahead, let us now discuss the types of triggers in SQL. Now, triggers are of two types in general according to the SQL standard language, which is row level trigger and statement level trigger. Now, row level trigger, which is activated for each row by a triggering statement such as insert, update or delete. Now, for example, if a table has inserted, updated or deleted multiple rows, the row trigger is fired automatically for each row affected by this insert or update or delete statement. And next we have the statement level trigger, which is fired once for each event that occurs on a table, regardless of how many rows are inserted, updated or triggered. Now further we have 6 types of triggers based on the events of occurrence of the triggers through the DML commands that are invoked and at the time of when they are executed. So we can define the maximum of 6 types of actions or events in the form of triggers, which is before insert, after insert, before update, after update, before delete and after delete. Let us now discuss about them in detail. Now first we have the before and after insert trigger. The before insert triggers are used to modify or check record values before they are saved to the database, whereas the after insert triggers are used to modify other records and access field values set by the system. And the syntax for before and after insert trigger is followed as delimiter, create trigger, trigger name, before or after is the keyword we have to mention prior to the insert name, on table name for each row begin, mention the body of the trigger and mention the end keyword and end with the delimiter. Next we have the before and after update trigger in SQL. Now before update triggers are invoked automatically before an update event occurs on the table associated with the triggers, while after update trigger is invoked when the operations on row is under execution after an update operation on the database. Now the syntax is also same. Instead of the insert, you have to just replace it with the update keyword with the before and after keywords as well. Now firstly we'll specify the trigger name that we want to create and it should be unique within the schema. Next we'll specify the trigger action time, which should be before update or after update. So this trigger will be invoked before each row of alterations occurs on the table if you use before, and similarly with the after keyword as well. And third, we'll specify the name of the table to which the trigger is associated. So it must be written after the on keyword. And if we do not specify the table name, a trigger would not exist. Finally, we'll specify the trigger body that contains a statement of execution when the trigger is activated, where you can mention the different condition using the when keyword as well. Now we cannot update the old values in a before update trigger and we can change the new values as well, which we'll discuss while we are executing the code in MySQL Workbench so that you'll have a clear idea. And finally, we have the before and after delete trigger as well. Before delete triggers are fired automatically before a delete event occurs in a table, and after delete triggers are invoked when the operations on the rows is under execution after any delete operation on the database as well. Now the syntax is also similar to that of previously to that of insert and update, which is create trigger name before after delete on table name for each row and then mention the trigger body. So in this way you can apply various triggers on your database. So to understand this in a more better way, let us jump into MySQL Workbench for further execution part. So as you can see, MySQL Workbench has started, and first let us discuss how to create a before insert trigger now. Now as discussed earlier, before insert trigger in SQL is invoked automatically whenever an insert operation is executed. So let us discuss how to create a before insert trigger with its syntax and an example. Now in order to create a trigger, you have to first create a new table and then insert values into it to perform a trigger operation. But we already know how to create a table and insert values into it. So let us just consider an already existing table, let's say new employees. So I'll just display the values, select star from new employees. So the new employees table has various attributes such as employee ID, first name, last name, email, phone number, hiring date, job ID, salary, manager ID, and department ID. Right. So let us now run the before insert syntax. So first we have the delimiter here. Now when we are writing SQL statements, we generally use the semicolon, right, to separate two statements. Now since a trigger is a stored procedure which consists of multiple statements separated by a column. So if you're using MySQL to define a stored procedure like trigger that contains semicolon characters, it will not treat the whole, like the stored procedure, as a single statement but many statements. Therefore you have to define the delimiter temporarily so that you can pass the whole the body of the trigger as a single statement. So typically we are just separating these statements using the double slash here. So delimiter. Now we have to write the actual syntax for the before insert trigger, which is create trigger, which is the keyword I'm using. And let us take the trigger name as, let's say, before insert. You can take it as per your own choice. Insert, before insert is the keyword on the table, that is new employees. Now I'm applying trigger for each row, so I'm specifying for each row. Now here comes the main part where you have to mention the condition. Now the trigger that I'll be invoking is, let's say now we have department IDs here, right, which are having values like 10, 20, 50, 100, 60s and 100. So if you notice here, we have the department IDs in the name in the multiples of values of 10. So I'll be creating a trigger whenever a new user is trying to insert values into their table as department ID which is less than 10. So in that case, I'll set the new department ID as 0. So the query would be if new dot department ID is less than 10, then set new dot department ID equals to 0. So mention the end if and end double slash. Now you might get a doubt here, like why I'm using new dot department ID. Now triggers allows access to values from the table for comparison purposes using the new and old keyword, and this availability of keywords will also depend on the trigger event which you're performing. Now since you're checking or modifying a value when you're trying to insert data using the new dot column modifier which is available, whereas if you're trying to insert old values, that is using the old dot column name value, does not exist for an insert statement because there is no information exists in its place beforehand. So that is the reason I'm taking the new keyword here. So we have created our trigger. So let's just execute this statement and we'll see the output. Okay, there is an error. So let me just. So it says that trigger already exists. Might be have taken it already. So let me just change it and keep it as department insert. So as you can see, our trigger has been successfully created. Now let us consider the new employee table again and let us insert some values to understand how this works. So I'll be inserting some values into the table. So I'm using insert into new employees values. So mention the employee ID, let's say 288, comma, mention the name of the employee, first name, let's say Carl, and the last name as Haddon. Next we have email, so let's take C Haddon. Next we have phone number, just type a random number. Next we have hiring date, so let us take as 15th June 2009. Next we have job ID, let's take SH clerk as our job ID. Next we have salary, let's take 35,000. Next manager ID, let's take 125 or 126. Next we have the department ID, so I'm taking the department ID here as 7. Right, so let us just execute this statement and we'll see the output. So our record has been inserted, so let me just retrieve the values again. So if you scroll down a bit, we have our new details of our employee, having employee ID as 288, whose name is Carl Haddon. And if you slide a bit, and you can see that since we have inserted the department ID value as 7, and the trigger will automatically be created here, which is department ID is less than 10, right? So automatically it has changed the value into 0. So in this way you can use the before insert to create a trigger in your table. Right, so I hope you've understood how to create a before insert trigger. Let's move ahead. Let us now discuss how to create an after insert trigger. Now, after insert trigger in SQL is basically invoked automatically whenever an insert has already occurred on the table. So let us just understand this with an example. So let us consider the customer tables here. So let us just display the values in the customer table. So a customer table has 4 attributes, which is customer ID, customer name, age, address, and we have a total of 5 records. So let us understand how this after insert trigger works. Now we have customer ID starting from 101 and 105. Now basically I'm going to create a trigger like whenever a customer's details has been inserted, which is having customer ID more than 200. So in that case, I'll be inserting this into another table instead of this customer table. So for that, let us just create another table. So you can create a table using this icon here. So I'm creating a new table, which is customer new, and we'll create the columns as well. So the column names need not be identical. It should basically have the same data type, even if it's not having the same column names. So ID, and then we have name of the customer, and then we have the age, and finally we have the address. Right, so let us just apply and we'll create a new table. Alright, so we have created a new table which is customer new here. So let us now write the syntax for after insert. So I'm again using the delimiter, and let us create a trigger now. Create trigger. So I'm taking the trigger name as again after insert. You can take it as per your own choice. So since we're creating after insert, mention the after insert on the customer table for each row. Now begin. So let us now create a trigger here. So the condition that we have taken is if new dot cust ID is greater than let's say 200. So in that case, insert into customer new values new dot cust ID comma new dot customer name, and then we have new dot age comma new dot address. Right, so let us just close this. and we have the endif /. So let us just execute this query and we'll see the output. So our query has been successfully executed. Let us now try to insert some values into the customer table. So I'm using the insert into customer values. So customer ID, let's say I'm taking 108. Name of the customer, let us take Priya. Let us take the age as 24 and address as Pune. And similarly, let us insert some more values. Let us now take 204 as the customer ID, name as Harsh, and age as 27, and address as Chennai. Let us insert a final record, which is let's say 109, comma, name as Sam, age 24, city, let us take Hyderabad, close the brackets, and let us insert one more final record. Let us take 214 as the customer ID, and the name will be John, age 25, and city will be Mumbai. Right, so we have inserted the values into our customer table. So as you can see, 4 rows have been inserted. So let us just display the records again. So as you can see, we have 4 new records of the customers having customer ID 108, 109, 204 and 214. Now let us see whether our trigger has been created or not. So let us display the values from the customer new table now. Select star from customer new. So as you can clearly see that the trigger that we have applied to our table is whenever the customer ID exceeds 200. Now in this case we have 2 IDs of the customers, which is 204 and 214. In that case the trigger will automatically insert new values into the new table instead of the previous table, which is customer. So in this way the after insert trigger works. Alright, moving ahead, let us now discuss about the before update trigger. Now before update trigger in SQL is invoked automatically whenever an update operation is performed or fired on the table associated with that trigger. So let us just understand this with an example here. So let us just consider again the new employees table here for our reference. Added another attribute which is bonus in our table. Now basically the trigger which you are going to create will be of this sort, wherein if you're updating the salary of the employees, let's say if you're updating the salary of employees whose salary is greater than 50,000 or 40,000, then we'll set the bonus value as 5,000, and if the salary is less than 40,000, in that case their bonus will be 3,000. So let me just write the syntax so that we'll have a clear understanding of it. So we'll use the delimiter again. Let us create a trigger update bonus. So we are creating before update trigger. So I'm writing the before update keyword on new employees. For each row, since we're performing on all the rows, mention the begin statement and mention the condition now. So the condition is basically is new dot salary is greater than 40,000. So in that case the new bonus value will be equals to 5,000. So else if the salary new dot salary is less than 40,000, so in that case we'll set the bonus value as 3,000. Set new bonus equals to 3,000. So mention the semicolon and mention the endif, since we have used two endif statements, if statements, so we'll mention endif 2 times before we close our statement here. So let us now execute this statement and we'll see the output. So our query has been successfully created here, guys. Let us now update the values in our new employee table. So let us write the update statement here. So I'm updating the new employees table. So update new employees, set salary equals to let's say 45,000 for only limited employees. Let's say whose employee ID is more than 200. So I'm just taking a reference here, or just an example or a scenario, so that we'll have an understanding on how this before update trigger works. Whose employee ID is greater than 200. So right, let us just execute the statement. So as you can see, 7 rows have been affected. So let us now display the new employees table again. So I'm using the select star from new employees. Alright, so let us move aside and see. Now, as you can clearly see that now employees who are having employees ID more than 200, which you have taken in our query. Now, if you can see, employee ID of Michael Haston is 201 and Pat Fay 202. And for Susan Marvis, we have 203 and so on. So for all those employees, we have a bonus attached to their salary, which is 5,000, which is basically the trigger that we have created. That is, if the salary is more than 40,000, in that case, we'll invoke a trigger where it will add bonus of 5,000 to all those employees. So in this way, before update trigger works in SQL. So in the same way, you can also create the before and after delete trigger as well. So now that you've understood how to implement this, now try to implement this before and insert delete in your system. If you are facing any issues, do let us know in the comment section below. We'll help you out. If you still face further issues, let us know that if you want us to create a separate video on those triggers as well. So, and that brings us to the end of today's session, guys. That was all about triggers in SQL. I hope you found this tutorial informative and helpful. Thank you for watching the video, guys. If you found this informative and helpful, make sure to leave a like to us and share it with your friends and family. If you have any further queries regarding any of the topics covered in today's session, feel free to let us know in the comment section below, and a team of experts will be more than happy to help resolve all your queries at the earliest. Until next time, stay safe and keep coding.